I felt the wine before I understood what it meant. Cold, then warm, then sticky against my cheek, dripping down the white silk of my dress like a wound that refused to close. 500 people went silent at once. Cameras that had been flashing for photos of the Whitfield Biogrid 10th anniversary gala suddenly found a better story. My husband stood in front of me, chest heaving, an empty wine glass still tilted in his hand. "Dean," I said quietly, "you just did that in front of every investor in this room." He leaned in close enough that only I could hear him. "You're nothing without me, Nora. This company is mine." I didn't wipe my face. That's the part nobody in that ballroom understood yet. I didn't reach for a napkin. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just reached into the small clutch at my hip, pulled out my phone, and pressed my thumb against the screen 3 times. Dean laughed, actually laughed, like my calm was a joke he was in on. "What, you gonna call your lawyer?" "Go ahead." I looked past him, toward the massive display screens mounted behind the stage, the ones broadcasting the Whitfield Biogrid logo in slow, confident rotation to the entire room. "No," I said. "I'm calling in a debt. Let me back up. My name is Nora Kensington. Before I was Nora Whitfield, I was the lead systems architect who built the biometric core of the company my husband now stood on stage claiming as his own. Before that, I was somebody's little sister. My brother, Adrian, was the real genius. He designed the encrypted grid architecture that now powered half the private energy infrastructure on the East Coast. He died 2 years ago, a car accident on a service road outside our father's testing facility, 1 week after he told me, in a voice I still hear at 3 in the morning, that Dean had been borrowing his patent files without asking. I never proved anything. Grief doesn't leave much room for forensic accounting. But I never stopped looking, either. Dean married me 18 months after Adrian's funeral. He told everyone it was love. He told me, privately, more than once, that marrying into the Kensington name was the smartest business decision he'd ever made. I let him believe that was the whole story, because the version where I was watching him, cataloging every transfer, every shell account, every night he came home smelling like a perfume that wasn't mine, that version was mine to keep. 3 minutes, I whispered to myself, watching the screens. The first thing to go dark was the investor dashboard behind him, the live feed showing real-time grid stability across 4 states. It flickered, then dropped to a single red banner, "System integrity compromised, administrator override." A murmur rolled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Dean's smile cracked at the edges. "What is this?" "Nora, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just stopped doing something. I stopped hiding it." At minute 2, the ballroom doors opened at the back, and I watched my father walk in. Richard Kensington doesn't enter rooms so much as reclaim them. He's built and sold 3 infrastructure companies, and he has never once raised his voice to do it. Beside him walked a man in a plain gray suit I recognized from the SEC's regional office, Nathan Cole, federal auditor, the kind of man who reads bank statements the way other people read bedtime stories. My father didn't come to me first. He walked straight to the podium mic, still warm from Dean's speech 20 minutes earlier, and tapped it once. "Good evening," he said, in the same calm voice he'd used to teach me to ride a bike. "For those who don't know me, I'm Richard Kensington. Some of you know me as an investor in this company. What most of you don't know is that I've held a controlling 91% voting share in Whitfield Biogrid since the week my son-in-law took over as CEO. Somewhere behind me, a champagne glass hit the floor and didn't break, just rolled, clinking softly across the marble, the only sound in a room that had otherwise stopped breathing. Tonight, my father continued, effective immediately, those shares transfer to their rightful architect. My daughter, Nora Kensington. Dean turned to me so fast his jacket flared. "This is insane." "This is, Nora, tell them this is a joke." "It's not a joke," I said. "It's an audit." Nathan Cole stepped forward with a tablet already glowing. "Mr. Whitfield, I have a court order authorizing immediate review of Whitfield Biogrid's financial records, specifically transactions linked to the Thorne biometric patent filings from 3 years ago. I watched something behind Dean's eyes give way. Not guilt, Dean didn't do guilt. Fear. At minute 3, his phone buzzed in his breast pocket. He pulled it out with a hand that had started, very slightly, to shake. I saw the reflection of the screen in the gala lights, a bank alert, red text, the words account access suspended, asset freeze pending investigation. He looked up at the boardroom's biggest donors, the ones who'd spent all night calling him the future of American energy infrastructure. Not one of them met his eyes. Phones were already coming out, not for photos this time, but for calls to their own legal teams. Nora. His voice cracked on my name. Nora, please. Whatever this is, we can fix it. We're married. This is our company. I finally reached up and wiped the wine from my cheek, slow, deliberate, like I had all the time in the world now. It was never our company, Dean, I said. It was my brother's. You just borrowed his name until I decided to take it back. That was when he went down. Not gracefully. His knees hit the marble hard enough that I heard the crack of bone against stone from 6 feet away, and the man who 3 minutes earlier had told me I was nothing without him wrapped both hands around the hem of my ruined white dress and started to beg, right there, in front of the cameras, in front of the board, in front of the woman standing quietly by the bar who I hadn't looked at once all night. Chloe, no. Paige. Paige Donovan, his head of public relations, his mistress, the woman who I later learned had orchestrated this entire humiliation to have me declared unstable in the divorce filing they'd already drafted. Except Paige wasn't smiling anymore either. Because what none of them knew, what only my father and I knew, standing in that ballroom while my husband sobbed against the floor, was that this wasn't the ending. It was the first 3 minutes of something so much bigger. Nobody moved for what felt like a full minute after Dean hit the floor. I remember the strangest details from that silence, the way the ice sculpture at the center of the dessert table had started to weep onto the tablecloth, the way the string quartet in the corner had simply stopped mid-phrase and never picked the note back up, the way my father stood at the podium with his hands folded, patient as a man waiting for a kettle to boil. Dean was still gripping the hem of my dress. Nora. Nora, look at me. We can call your father off. I know people. I know people who can make this go away. I know, I said. That's actually the problem, Dean. I stepped back and the fabric slid out of his hands. Nathan Cole crouched down near him, not to help him up, just to be at eye level. Mr. Whitfield, I'd advise you not to discuss the specifics of this situation with anyone until you've spoken to counsel. Anything said in this room tonight is being recorded by at least a dozen phones. Dean's head snapped toward the crowd, like he was seeing them for the first time as witnesses instead of an audience. Board members were already peeling away in 2s and 3s, murmuring into their phones, the kind of retreat that happens when a stock is about to become a liability instead of an asset. That's when Paige finally moved. She crossed the ballroom floor in heels that didn't make a sound, and for one long second I thought she was going to kneel beside Dean, play the grieving mistress, give the tabloids their next frame. Instead she stopped in front of me. Your father called me 8 months ago, she said, quiet enough that only I could hear it. I didn't believe him at first. I thought it was a trap. I stared at her. What are you talking about? The live stream, she said. The one everyone thinks I set up to humiliate you. I didn't do it for Dean, Nora. I did it because your father asked me to. I felt the ground tilt slightly under the marble. You're going to want to hear this somewhere private, Paige said, glancing at the cameras still hovering at the edges of the room. Because what I have isn't just tonight's video. It's 3 years of everything. My father's driver took the 4 of us, me, my father, Nathan Cole, and Paige, to the Kensington townhouse 11 blocks away from the gala's wreckage and the reporters already camped outside. Dean was left behind with hotel security, and soon after, two officers from the financial crimes unit who'd been waiting in an unmarked car in the parking garage the entire evening. I didn't ask how my father had arranged their presence. I was starting to understand that my father arranged a great many things I hadn't been told about. In the townhouse study, Paige set a slim black drive on the desk like it was something fragile. 2.5 years ago, she said, Dean brought me in to run PR damage control after your brother's accident. There were early questions, reporters asking why a rising systems engineer died on a private testing road he had no scheduled reason to be on. Dean wanted the story buried fast. I buried it. My hands went cold. You knew something about Adrian's death and you buried it. I didn't know then, Paige said. I know now. 6 months into the job, I found drafts of biometric patent filings in Dean's private server, dated 2 weeks before your brother died. They weren't Dean's work. The architecture notes, the handwriting in the margins, I'd seen your brother's notebooks. I recognized it. Nathan Cole leaned forward. You're saying Dean Whitfield had access to Adrian Thorne's unpublished patent work before his death? I'm saying Dean filed for that patent 9 days after the funeral, Paige said. Under Whitfield BioGrid's name. I have the original time-stamped files. The ones on the company server were altered afterward, new dates, new authorship metadata. But I made copies before anyone thought to look. I sat down slowly on the arm of my father's leather chair, because my legs had stopped being entirely reliable. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I asked. Because for 2 years I was terrified of Dean, Paige said, and for the first time that night her PR polish slipped completely. He doesn't just fire people who cross him, Nora. He ends them. I watched him do it to 2 other executives who asked too many questions about the grid contracts. I needed proof solid enough that he couldn't spin his way out, and I needed someone powerful enough to protect me when I handed it over. Me, my father said quietly. You, Paige agreed. You reached out first. I want that on the record, because everyone in that ballroom tonight is going to call me a homewrecker who turned on her lover for a payday. That's not what happened. I turned on a man who I believe had my predecessor's boyfriend, Adrian's research partner, quietly pushed out of the country on a fabricated visa violation 18 months ago because he asked one too many questions about a service road. The room went very still. Eris Thorne's kill switch, my father said, turning to me. Nora, I need you to walk Mr. Cole through it. Now, while it still matters. I looked at both of them, and something Adrian used to say came back to me, the last real conversation we had, 3 days before he died, sitting in his cluttered lab with 2 mugs of burnt coffee between us. If anything ever happens to me, he'd said, half joking, half not, check the biometric core. I built in a failsafe. Nobody gets full control of that system without my signature key or yours. Dean thinks he owns the architecture. He doesn't even know the architecture is listening. I hadn't understood what he meant. Not until 3 years later, standing in my father's study with an SEC auditor waiting for an answer. My brother didn't just build the grid's biometric authentication system, I said. He built a kill switch inside it, one that could only be triggered by a Thorne family biometric signature. Mine or his. He must have known, even then, that someone was going to try to take it from him. Nathan Cole's pen had stopped moving. You're telling me the system failure at the gala tonight, the grid alert, the account freezes, that wasn't retaliation. That was a dormant protocol your brother built before he died. That was my brother's insurance policy, I said. I just finally had a reason to use it. Paige was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place, something between relief and dread. There's one more thing, she said. Something I haven't told your father yet. My stomach dropped before she even said it. The service road Adrian died on, she said. I pulled the maintenance logs last month. There's a work order dated the morning of the accident. It was authorized by Dean's personal signature. The study went so quiet I could hear the study clock ticking on the mantel, each second landing like a small stone. My brother's death wasn't an accident, I said. It wasn't a question. Paige didn't answer. She didn't have to. My father rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out at the dark townhouse street, his voice steady even as his jaw wasn't. Nora, he said. Tonight was never going to be the end of this. Tonight was just the moment Dean Whitfield found out he was losing the company. He turned to face me. Tomorrow he finds out what he actually took from this family, and what it's finally going to cost him. I didn't sleep that night. Neither, I suspect, did anyone else on the 14th floor of Kensington Tower, where my father's legal team had set up what Nathan Cole was calling, without irony, a war room. By 6 in the morning, 3 federal investigators, my father's chief counsel, and a forensic accountant named Renata Sue had turned the conference table into a landscape of financial records, printed emails, and a whiteboard timeline that started with Adrian's death and ended with last night's gala. I sat at the head of the table with a coffee I hadn't touched, watching a woman I'd met 4 hours earlier draw a red line connecting a shell company in the Caymans to a maintenance contractor Dean had personally hired 11 days before my brother died. This is the part that's going to matter most in court, Renata said, tapping the line. Not the wine. Not the marriage. This? Walk me through it, my father said. Dean didn't just steal Adrian's patents after his death, Renata said. The paper trail shows he was already negotiating licensing rights to the biometric grid architecture 6 weeks before the accident, rights he couldn't have unless Adrian was gone or Adrian signed off. Adrian never signed off. We have email records showing your brother refused 3 separate buyout offers in the month before he died. So Dean had a motive, Nathan Cole said, and 11 days before the accident, he authorized maintenance work on the exact road where it happened. There's more, Renata said, sliding a folder toward me. The maintenance work order describes a guardrail inspection. There was no guardrail on that stretch of road. There never had been. I made myself look at the photo clipped to the file, a stretch of gray asphalt I'd driven past 100 times without knowing it was the last road my brother ever saw. I want him charged with this, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Not just fraud. Not just the patents. This? My father's counsel, a compact silver-haired woman named Ilsa Grant, shook her head slowly. Nora, I understand the impulse. But a maintenance work order isn't a murder weapon. We don't have proof Dean was there, or that he ordered the road left unsafe on purpose. What we have is circumstantial, enough to compel discovery, not enough to convict. Then we get discovery, I said. We will, Ilsa said. But it starts with what we can prove today: patent theft, wire fraud, securities violations tied to the falsified authorship filings. That's airtight. That's what puts him in a courtroom. Once he's there under oath, with his finances exposed and his company gone, people talk, Nora. Guilty men always talk eventually, especially when they think talking might save them from something worse. I didn't like it. But I understood it. By 9 that morning, Dean's arraignment was already trending under 3 different hashtags, the ballroom footage cut into 15-second clips with captions that ranged from gleeful to reverent. Hashtag Winegate. Hashtag 3-minute reversal. Somewhere in there, without my permission or my father's, someone had gotten hold of a still image of me standing calm and wine-streaked in front of 500 people, and it had become, overnight, a kind of folk symbol for something I hadn't fully processed yet myself. Dean's lawyer released a statement calling the grid shutdown an unauthorized and potentially criminal act of corporate sabotage by Nora Kensington Whitfield. I almost laughed reading it in the war room. Almost. He's going to try to spin you as the villain, Paige said. She'd stayed the night too, curled in the corner of the conference room with her own laptop, quietly building what she called a counter-narrative timeline, every falsified document, every backdated file, laid out in language a jury could follow without a systems engineering degree. Let him try, I said. I'm serious, Nora. Paige looked up. Dean is good at this. He turned a dead engineer's patents into his own legacy for 3 years and nobody blinked. He will find a way to make the story about your instability, your grief, your motive for wanting his company. You need to be ready for that. I've had 2 years to get ready, I said. At 11, the call came and that changed the shape of everything again. Nathan Cole took it in the hallway, and when he came back into the conference room his expression had gone carefully blank in the way I was learning meant something serious. That was the bureau field office, he said. They picked Dean up for processing an hour ago. During intake, before his lawyer arrived, he made a statement. Off the record, he thinks. It's not. What did he say? My father asked. Nathan hesitated, glancing at me like he was deciding whether I could hear it standing up. He said, and I'm quoting the transcript, she was never supposed to find the kill switch. Adrian swore it was only theoretical. If I'd known it was real, I would have handled him differently. The room went very still. Handled him, I repeated. He said handled him. He did, Nathan said quietly. And under interrogation protocol, that phrase alone is enough for us to formally reopen your brother's death as a homicide investigation. I set down the coffee cup I'd been holding for 4 hours without drinking, and for the first time since the wine hit my face, I felt something other than calm move through me, something sharper, older, closer to the surface than I'd let it get in 2 years of careful, quiet grief. Good, I said. Then let's finish what he started. My father was already reaching for his phone. There's one more piece we haven't used yet, he said. The kill switch didn't just freeze Whitfield Biogrid's accounts last night, Nora. It logged every unauthorized access attempt Dean made to that system going back 3 years, every time he tried to override Adrian's original architecture and couldn't. Every failed attempt has a timestamp. And 2 of those timestamps, he said, looking at me directly now, are from the week your brother died. I felt my pulse in my ears. You're saying Dean was trying to get into the system before Adrian was even gone? I'm saying, my father said, your brother built that failsafe because he knew Dean was coming for him. And somewhere in 3 years of access logs, Nora, is the exact moment your brother realized it too. Renata was already pulling up the raw log files on the conference room screen, her fingers moving fast across the keyboard. Here, she said, and the room leaned in as one. 6 days before the accident. A failed override attempt, 11:47 p.m., flagged and rejected by the biometric core. She clicked once more and a second file opened beneath it, a short internal message, buried in the system's private admin log, dated the same night. Adrian left something, Renata said slowly, reading the timestamp again to make sure. A message. Attached to the failed override. It's addressed to you. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. Open it, I said. Renata's cursor hovered over the file for a second longer than necessary, as if even she understood that whatever was inside didn't belong to the investigation anymore. It belonged to me. Nora, my father said gently, you don't have to do this here. We can move to a private room. No, I said. Open it. The message unfolded on the screen, not a video, not audio, just text, written the way Adrian always wrote when he was tired and past pretending to be careful with his words. Nora, if you're reading this, it means someone tried to break the core and got locked out, and the system flagged it to me the way I built it to. I don't know for sure it's Dean. I don't want to believe it's Dean. But I've stopped believing the version of things he tells us at dinner. I built a failsafe into the biometric grid. Only a Thorn signature can override it. If something happens to me, and I mean that literally, not dramatically, because I've started being careful about which roads I drive and when, I need you to know the system will wait for you. It'll sit there, locked, useless to anyone who isn't us, for as long as it takes. Don't let him tell you it was an accident if it wasn't. And don't let him tell you the company was ever his. It was never his. It was always going to be yours, because you're the only other person alive who understands what I built well enough to protect it. I love you. Take care of Dad. And if you ever get the chance, make him say it out loud. Don't let him get away with a quiet ending. Nobody in the conference room spoke. My father had turned toward the window, one hand pressed flat against the glass like he needed something solid to hold onto. Paige had stopped typing entirely. Even Nathan Cole, a man who I imagined had read 1,000 pieces of evidence without flinching, sat very still. I read it twice. Then a third time, slower, like I could pull my brother's voice out of the pixels if I concentrated hard enough. He knew, I said finally. He knew, and he still went to work every day. He still sat across from Dean at family dinners. He was building a case, my father said quietly, turning back. The same way you have been for 2 years. He just ran out of time to finish it. Then I'll finish it for him. Dean's trial began 4 months later, in a courtroom that looked nothing like the ballroom where this had started but felt, in its own quiet way, like a mirror of it, everyone watching, waiting to see who would be left standing. The patent fraud and securities charges were, as Ilse Grant had promised, airtight. Renata's financial trail, Paige's preserved files, the falsified authorship metadata, all of it built a case Dean's attorneys spent more time trying to plea bargain than contest. But it was the access logs that changed the temperature of the room. The failed override attempt from 6 days before Adrian's death. The maintenance work order for a guardrail that never existed. And Dean's own recorded words from intake, she was never supposed to find the kill switch, played back to a jury that went very quiet when they heard it. Dean took the stand in the 3rd week, against his lawyer's advice, because I think somewhere underneath the tailored suit, and the practiced composure, he still believed he could talk his way out of a room the way he always had. Mr. Whitfield, the prosecutor asked, did you order maintenance work on the service road where Adrian Thorne died? I ordered a routine safety inspection, Dean said. That's all that work order was. There was northwest guardrail on that road, Mr. Whitfield. There never had been. What exactly was being inspected? Dean's jaw tightened. I don't recall the specifics of a document from 3 years ago. You recall enough to have signed it personally rather than delegating it, as you did every other maintenance request that quarter. Why this one? Silence stretched long enough that the judge finally prompted him to answer. Dean never did, not directly. And in a courtroom, sometimes silence is its own confession. The jury didn't convict him of Adrian's death. Ilse had been right about that from the first morning in the war room. The evidence was strong enough to reopen the case, strong enough to haunt him, but not strong enough, in the end, to cross the line into an unambiguous verdict. What they did convict him of was patent theft, securities fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction. 22 years, the judge said, reading off a sentence that would outlast every headline from the gala night. It wasn't everything. I understood, standing in that courtroom, that some doors don't get to close all the way, no matter how much evidence you pile against them. But it was enough for the world to know exactly who Dean Whitfield really was, stripped of the company, the title, and the version of the story where he got to be the hero. I sold what remained of Whitfield Biogrid's public shell 8 months later, folding the biometric architecture, Adrian's real legacy, into a private research foundation that bears his name instead of a man who never deserved to touch it. Paige runs communications for the foundation now. She earned that, in the end, more than she ever thought she would. My father still calls me every Sunday, the way he always has, though the calls are longer now, and quieter, and sometimes we don't talk about business at all. Last spring, I stood in the lab where Adrian used to work, cleared out now, repurposed, sunlight coming through windows he'd kept blacked out for years because he said the glare hurt his eyes when he was coding. I don't know if he'd recognize it. I like to think he would. I keep one thing from that night, still, tucked in a drawer I don't open often, a swatch of white silk, wine-stained beyond saving, cut from the dress I wore to a party that was supposed to be my humiliation and became, instead, the first 3 minutes of the rest of my life. People ask me sometimes if I regret how public it all became, the viral clips, the headlines, the version of my worst night that strangers still replay for entertainment. I don't. Because somewhere in all that noise, a man finally said out loud what he'd spent 3 years pretending never happened. My brother asked me not to let him get away with a quiet ending. He didn't.